Children's Church. We have a Communion Sunday today, which is always supposed to be a more contemplative time for us. We also sang some really powerful songs today. I thought it was a very good worship time. All Creatures of Our God and King, that hymn written by Francis, and Mark alluded to him Francis of Assisi. Mark alluded to him sitting in jail cell when he read that. And as we talk about reconverting fear, imagine you're in prison, wondering what's going to happen. It's not pleasant. And there's things that happen, and I'll talk about this in just a minute. There's three things that happen when we experience fear. There's a lot of things that happen, but just as far as trying to reconvert fear today, we're going to focus on three, and then get some advice from Peter on fear issues that he didn't think he had. Probably like a lot of you here today are like, well, I don't really have major fear issues. You do. You're being like Peter, you don't think you do. And then some of us know we do. And then there's me who actually doesn't have. No. That's what a lot of you think. That's not true either. But so imagine Francis in there and he's afraid. And when you're afraid, one of the things that happens, and the first thing that happens is a physiological response. And so there's things going on, to say it as simply as possible, hormonally in you the moment you have the fear spike. And when you're sitting in jail, that's going on. And other creatures around you pick up on that on some nonverbal, non-conscious level. And so then they're edgier. Now imagine that that's going on and you're in a jail cell for your faith and you see rats. And so now your fear spikes even more. But Francis didn't. He reconverted his fear to the point where he could even appreciate the rats. Most of us would just spike into a downward trial from there. We sang right after that about God being glorified and the example of Jesus and our need to lay our lives down like the one that he gave. We have one life, one voice, one sacrifice. Take this life and be glorified. Few of us, probably none of us in this room, will actually be called on to lay down our life for Christ. But it's the emotions of that. There's a lot of things in our life where we feel like we know how it should happen. And when it doesn't seem to be going that way, we feel threatened by that. And we don't then lay down our life. We try to control what's happening. And we're supposed to be influencing things for God. We're supposed to be stewards, but not for that reason. And that's where it goes downhill very quickly, because we will then quote the fact, well, I'm supposed to be a steward of God. I'm supposed to make a difference. And then go in, but really being driven primarily by our own sense of insecurity or threat or loss of control, but then playing the Pharisee and claiming it's righteous. And that's such a trap for people who, on some level, as Paul says about the Pharisees, are zealous to walk with God. But it isn't according to knowledge. We're not even self-aware. So how can we really know anything else if we're not managing what goes on inside of us well? We started working through this last week. That's the main verse. Do not be afraid of sudden terror, the way I said it last week and the way I've heard it said, and I'll allude to this again in a minute. The fear spike, the sudden terror, or of the ruin of the wicked when it comes. I talked about this some on Wednesday night last week. We hear ruin of the wicked and we think judgment of the wicked. And it might mean that, but it more likely means the storm of the wicked when it comes. So when something wicked this way comes. And so that brings a storm into our life. And anything that stirs up a storm in you, your gut response is to label that wicked. And it may be, but God's still God. And he is, at the very least, allowing it in your life. So there's a different way that we need to process that fear spike that really shows that we get that God is sovereign. That fear spike, now a lot of you know I've gotten this training. It's called SPEAR. That's an acronym, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. And that might be hard for you to read, but that's from Tony Blauer, and that is a picture of Tony Blauer. He runs Blauer Tactical Systems. And he says, fear throttles everything we do, from whom we marry to where we live, from how much weight we lift to whether or not we defend ourselves. Managing the fear spike, the sudden terror, is the real value of our course. Because if you can manage the fear spike in a violent encounter, you can probably manage it just about anywhere. At least you have the tools. And it's very hard because it happens so fast. And that's really what that Proverbs is talking about. When you have that fear spike, when you have that sudden terror, this storm of something wicked, something bad, something terrible that your imagination kicks in, and that's one of our questions that was asked, is how do we stop it from controlling our imagination? And Proverbs is saying the wise person, it isn't so much about intellectual knowledge, the wise person manages that well so they can live life skillfully. See, fear is what really destroys our ability to live well. The kind of fear, the way we experience it. So I showed that at the end last week. That's part of it. Someday we will all die, Snoopy. And as you go through life, and you start even as a small child to realize that, maybe your grandparent dies, whatever, and you start to dawn on you, we have a fear spike. And that's going all the way back to Eden. And it troubles us. And then you get the wisdom of the beagle, true. But on all the other days, we will not. So you come to a place of acceptance and say, this fear spike that's a face of death is actually keeping me from living life well all the other days that are not a death day, a death moment. Someday we will all die. True. But on all the other days, we won't. Can we just be life-oriented? Just be life-oriented, even with the fear spike. So, awareness of that. And this leads us to where we are today. Life is found in the dance between your deepest desire and your greatest fear. That's from Tony Robbins, well-known life coach. There is this dance between what we most aspire to and then all the stuff that we think is going to wreck that. And we have to learn to manage that well, partly by examining our desires, and we'll come back to that. A lot of what causes fear in us is really just our focus is misplaced. Because we are saying, for my desires to be fulfilled, you have to change, you pathetic soul. Bad idea, right from the beginning. You think you need other people to change. You don't. That's lie number one right there. And as soon as you don't confront that and realize, wow, I'm getting so disgusted with all these other people, it probably goes back to not managing something inside you well. That's a fear spike. That you don't even recognize as fear anymore. And so then my desire is already misplaced, and that's feeding the fear, and I've got to find this way to navigate that, to manage that dance well. And we had a bunch of questions related to that as we try to figure this out. How do I deal with it? I already mentioned earlier. Is there a magic formula? How can we keep it from debilitating us? How can we stop it from controlling our imaginations? All of these things are great questions because they help us really deal with what's going on. And here's the thing you first have to ask and accept. Whatever you're getting spiked up about, and it may not be what you think, because remember, we bounce into a lot of these secondary emotions. Jealousy, envy, anger, whatever. We have a lot of these secondary emotions that kick in, but if we could get past them and actually re-engage with, oh, I felt threatened by that. It tells you right there what you're focusing on. And if we would manage that well, it can actually be quite empowering. Whatever we fear reveals what we are focusing on. Could be the loss of a loved one. I don't know what I'll do if I can't manage if that person's taken from me. Is that actually true? I mean, you might make it true, but is that actually like absolutely true that a human being cannot manage if they lose this person that they so love? That is not true. And there are all kinds of people who show us it's not true. And then the way we get around it is, well, that's them, that's not me. Why can't it be you? Is that true that it can't be you? See the lies we tell ourselves. And if we could get back in touch with what that deep hormonal adrenaline dump is actually revealing, it can be quite empowering. It can actually get you focused the right way. But the impulse of fear is now broken in us. And that twisted fear is the devil's work. He first broke it in himself. That is the mystery of evil. He took his focus from God to himself. Fear is focus. It's twisted, it's broken. We have to heal. And we heal by looking to people, both in Scripture, maybe in church history, whatever, but especially in Scripture, because that text is inspired. But then also in my actual life, people that I interact with that face fear. And that's an FACE. That's an acronym that we'll get to, hopefully today. They face their fear. They're actually getting more honest about it. And despite the fact that they have fear, they show a high level of fulfillment from the two great commandments. They just love God and love people. And it seems so simple for them. And we're like, what's wrong with you? Don't you see how terrible this is? And they're like, they're filled up by loving. Isn't that what John says? Mature love, the kind of love we were created for, when we practice it, it casts out this kind of tormenting fear. And Jesus ultimately says, well, you can't just say love God. If you love God and don't love people, that's a lie. Yeah, you can't really do that. Now, this is important. I'll say it a couple times. Deeply note in your heart that the two great commandments are not about results in other people. They're not about results in others. They are about what is going on in you in this present moment. And Jesus says, can you just work on that? It's not about measuring results in your world out here. That's a trap. Because if you're getting good observable results, you'll assume you're fine. You may not be. A lot of people get great results by manipulating people's fear and not dealing honestly with their own. And if you're getting bad results out here, what you think are bad results, you'll make bad judgments. It's not about that. That's just feeding twisted fear. Jesus says it. I don't know how to except to repeat it again. What does it really come down to? It comes down to what's going on in you. Are you loving God and are you loving other people right now? Just focus on that. On this hangs everything else. Not results in others. How you are presently processing things. That's Francis of Assisi in his jail cell when he sees the rats. And because Francis did it, and Paul and Silas did it when they were in prison, and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego did it, and Ruth did it, and Esther did it, and Daniel did it, and Old Testament Joseph did it, and Peter learned to do it. And they all did too. We just know more about Peter's process. Okay? They did it. You can do it. I can do it. And as soon as we're like, well, yeah, they're them and I'm me. No, they're not them and you're you. We are human. And people can do it. Not going to do it perfectly. But to do it, we have to start with a clear understanding of what fear is and how we experience it right now. So where are we? And how God's word can coach us through that so we can reconvert that fear back to what the holy angels feel. And that's the beginning of wisdom. So there's three aspects to how we experience fear. The first one is physiological. That's the fear spike. That's precognitive. However logical you think you're being, once you feel that fear spike, your logic is following the fear spike and is influenced by it. So you're not as logical as you think you are. There's three. That's the third step. And that step is hugely important. I'm not diminishing it. It's literally the third step. And when you think it's the first step and you're being logical, you're self-deceived. If you're not managing the first two well. This is why you get in these debates with people that just never go anywhere. Physiologically, you have that spike. Then we immediately, and again, this is largely precognitive, pre-analytical, but we do have this very primal good, bad. And fear to us typically feels bad. So we've already labeled it. That's step two. Then we start discussing it. We use language, whether our inner narrative or talking about it with other people. And by then, you're probably into some secondary emotion. You're no longer dealing directly with the fear. You're jealous, you're angry, you're envious, and you're justifying why you're jealous, angry, envious, and never really dealing with the initial threat. So remember that. Physiology first. Then there's this very primal judgment or assessment of it. Then you start explaining why your judgment or assessment is right. And you start describing it. But it's the description of it to ourselves and to others that is where we get really in trouble. Because if we're not managing the initial spike well, like Job, you're talking like a foolish woman. Think about this in these three steps. Shall we receive what we label to be good from God and not what we label to be evil, if I can paraphrase a little there? The first step is just acceptance. It's happening. It's real. My body's telling me it's real. I'm having a physiological response to it. I've got to manage that first before I start with labels. Because I'm going to start telling myself a narrative based on my initial label. And Job was wiser than that. Because we tell ourselves a flawed narrative, and then we tell it to other people. After we have felt the fear spike, after we have decided we don't like it, we then tell ourselves again and again how horrible it was. And we'll tell anybody else who will listen again and again how horrible it was. And by the way, that has its place. We need to talk through things. But if we're not being honest that I started from a bad foundation, I didn't accept this well, then the adjectives start kicking in. It was bad. It was really, really bad. Now, it was really, really, really bad. About 15 years down the road, you're thinking it's like, some, catastrophic global event. And there are catastrophic global events. But most of what's driving us isn't that. The really bad description grows taller on down the line because then we can justify to ourselves our own unwillingness to actually accept and process our own grief and loss and fear. The great commandments in the present moment are what cure us. I have got to let all that go, accept that God is sovereign, that He has allowed this, and I've just got to be in the present moment in a way where I can love God and love people. And if you're not processing all that well, and you've got that going on inside of you, the people around you pick up on it. They don't label it correctly either, But now they're having to process your hormone spike, your fear spike, your secondary emotion of anger, angst, envy, jealousy, criticism. And there's places for all of those things properly done. But most of us aren't doing it properly. So we're imposing on everybody around us all this stuff. And they're just, wow, okay, wow, I didn't realize I was being that terrible. And maybe they were being terrible, but they weren't very, very, very terrible like we tend to label them. The great commandments cure us. I just need to get in the present moment, resolve all that stuff I'm bringing with me into the situation, and just focus on loving the person. And Peter shows us a path. It's step one. And the path, if I run the bullet points real quick, he basically says, just start becoming a good caregiver in the present moment. And to do that, you'll have to learn submission. And if you learn submission, you're going to have to practice humility. And once you become humble, you can release the fear and anxiety. And once you release that fear and anxiety, you will experience for yourself God's care for you. And once you're doing that, you can actually resist the devil. Because you will get to this place where you are settled. The old King James says you'll get God's settling. Solidity, grounding. I've quoted this to several of you. The most recent example I can think of is D McClintock, right back there, where Lao Tse says, can you be still and wait till your own mud settles in the water of your life? And then it's clear. But can you just wait and be in this good place until your own mud settles? And then you have clarity. Now, when Peter coaches us through this, he is the guy to coach us through this, because we know from his life that what he thought was righteous, what he thought was obvious, no, Lord, you're wrong. Don't talk like that about this cross, was actually a fear spike in him that he didn't manage well. When he needed to tell Jesus, no, I love you more than they love me, there was actually insecurity going on in him. And Jesus saw it. Jesus is the one who reads everything correctly. But Peter didn't see it. But he learned to. At 1 Peter 5, written more towards the end of his life, he starts coaching us through how you deal with this. He gives us great steps. And this is just step one. And of course, with anything that we're really trying to deal with in our own sanctification process, not, hey, let me tell you how you need to be sanctified. In my own sanctification process, as I try to figure out what's going on in me, so I can just represent God well in this situation, or at least less terribly. That's when we get on the right track. We have to frame that biblically. And Peter gives us some things. So last week, I talked about gain a courageous heart and then use your cognitive tools. And we're going to try to get to breaking the fear loop. That's fine, Brian. They can read it. Oh, you're not looking at that? Okay. I saw him get no, we're going to get to a place where you act. We're going to get to breaking the fear loop and follow the emotional echo. Probably follow the emotional echo first so we can break the fear loop. But today, I added this little Selah, pause, because I wanted to talk from Peter. And he just gives us 6 things. And they're not, he does it in 11 verses. And there's a lot of imperatives and then how you apply this imperative to your life. I don't want to get into all that. I just want to roll through the points. And the first one is really just starting the right way. Encourage others. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder. Peter's more than an elder, but he's coming along. In other words, it starts with the people who are supposed to have their act together more. And elders was definitely an office in the new church, but like many of our New Testament titles, even apostle, it does have a broader application than just that technical office. Same thing with elders, same thing with deacons, Yes, they were offices, but they also had a broader application. And he's really saying, you who have more life experience, and especially if you're also sitting in this office, you need to model this. And I need to model it, Peter is saying, because by now he's older. He has a lot more life experience. As a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, that's where he brings in that apostolic, I'm an eyewitness. As well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed, shepherd the flock of God that is among you. And the first step in encouraging others is believe it's worth it. And a partaker of the glory that's going to be revealed. This is worth it. This is glorious. This is valuable. It may not always feel that way. It may not even play out for you in this life, but it is an innately, incredibly valuable thing. If you're going to hang in here and reconvert your own fear and encourage others, you've got to believe it's worth it. It's going to come down to your core beliefs. And I'm not talking about your doctrinal beliefs here. I'm talking about in your gut. Do you believe it's worth it? And that's when we get discouraged, is when we don't believe it's worth it. And we just need to be honest about it. I no longer feel like it's worth it, and that's my problem, because it is worth it. What happened to me? We have to ask that question first. Believe it's worth it. Take positive initiative. The glory is worth it, so shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight. Take initiative. Don't sit around waiting for someone to make your world better. You go make someone's world better. Take initiative. Be a shepherd. Jesus was up in heaven, really sad about the human condition, wishing someone would make it better. No, I'll make it better. I'll give my life for it. Take positive initiative. Most people who get trapped in fear, anxiety, anger, envy, jealousy, they settle into passivity. Or they settle into passivity, get so turned up inside that then they react in a negative way. And that always makes things better. No. Take positive initiative. To take positive initiative, Peter tells us 4 things. I'll stop right there for that. Number 1, don't feel like you're constrained to do it. Hey, sometimes we are constrained and we just need to live with that. But Peter says, not under compulsion. If you feel like your whole life is under compulsion, you're not healthy. Peter says, don't let that happen. You can get there, but something's wrong inside. Remember, it's not about results in others. It's about how you're processing things. Don't do this from this constant sense of compulsion. There will be times. Don't do that. It says, be willing. This is a great opportunity. Wow, you've laid this opportunity at my feet where I can actually make a positive difference in someone else's life. What an opportunity. This is glorious. Be willing. Number 3, the second don't chase money. How many of us, if we were honest, are really chasing a more prosperous earthly lifestyle and kind of tacking God onto that and hoping it will all work out? Peter's like, yeah, that's not going to heal you. You can fool even yourself, but that doesn't change what's really going on. And you're certainly not fooling God. He says, do have a prepared mind. That means train. Put yourself in situations where you can manage these things, and you'll fail. But by continually working at it, practice doesn't make perfect, but it makes us less terrible. We get better. You just have to keep doing it. And your mind gets more trained, more prepared. Those are all positive initiatives, which in taking positive initiatives, you have to make sure you don't do 2 negatives, operate constantly out of a sense of constraint, or really to advance yourself and your earthly prosperity. But be willing and just keep training. Have a prepared mind. To keep taking positive initiative, there's one thing you have to stop. Stop needing to fix people. It says, not domineering over those in your charge. Like, just look, let me fix you. And I went into the pastorate, so I don't struggle with this at all, like wanting to fix people. No. But hopefully I'm not domineering about it. And then when you don't perform at a level I think you should, I'm losing heart. Oh, that's my problem. I shouldn't need to fix you for me to be in a good place. Stop needing to fix people. Start fixing yourself. Not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. And now he talks about the younger. So for us, this is baby boomers and millennials. And there's a major generational disconnect. There's always a major generational disconnect. You can go back to ancient philosophers, and they're talking about the next generation coming back up, and it sounds like baby boomers talking about millennials. And then you can read the younger ones who are talking about how everybody before them messed up the world that they now have to fix. And that happens to some extent with every generation. It's really bad with baby boomers and millennials. It's probably as bad as it's been in the last, 500 years? No, let's try 50. When the baby boomers were the young generation and you had the 60s. And they were trying to hand it to them. And it was very tumultuous. And people were like, this might be the end of the country. And someday, it will be. And you can always paint that negative picture and just keep doing it until you're actually right. And say, I told you someday we would all die, and you've missed Snoopy's wisdom of, yeah, but every other day until then, we won't. It's like, it's kind of easy to be a cynic and just talk about how it's going to fail in the end, because eventually you'll be right. But you'll be wrong 10,000 times before then. And then there's a resurrection. So are you right? That whole way of thinking, it just creates anxiety and what I call angst inside of us. And that's a problem. We shouldn't be that way. And what a big part of it is, there's something you have to accept. And it's just the sovereignty of God. And this is easy to say in theory, but it must play out in how you deal with actual people in your life. If you're one of the older, your attitude toward the younger. If you're one of the younger, your attitude towards the older. How you work through this, all of you, older or younger, submit. Accept it. It's easy to talk about it in theory, and then we meet people and don't practice it. That's how good your theory. It's easy to talk about the sovereignty of God systematically in our theologies and have all of our Calvinism debates. That's easy. I mean, if you have a mind that's wired technically that way. It's harder to actually just emotionally accept things as they are and realize that God knows a lot more than me and has a lot higher character than me, and if this is happening, he's at least allowed it, so why am I not emotionally accepting it? Because emotionally, I'm not at peace with the sovereignty of God. That's the harder battle. And that's the one we fight every day, even while we argue intellectually out of this place of emotional unease about why you must accept the 5 points of Calvinism or none of them or whatever. And we're not really discussing it from a place of emotional acceptance. So we're wrong before we even begin. And when you're not there emotionally, you tend to do one of two things. You tend to grumble. That's the first thing the Israelites did in the wilderness. And then when God gives you an opportunity, you tend to be timid and resistant and not really bring the level of initiative or the spirit that a Caleb and a Joshua brought to it. Meanwhile, you're grumbling. But then when God tries to bless you, you don't go grab the blessing. And then you sit there and grumble about nobody else is doing things right, including God. That was the Israelites in the wilderness. I've said it enough times, we're hard to bless because we wreck it. And that Peter keeps moving through this as you try to come to this practical acceptance of the sovereignty of God. You have to emotionally first accept what is. And you can't even accurately judge things as far as what am I supposed to do about it until I'm in a place of peace with what is. Because my thinking's messed up. Unacceptance, this is a hard statement, your emotional unacceptance of what is a defiance of the sovereignty of God. And mine is too. It's happening. Therefore, God is accepting it. He may not agree with it. That's another discussion. But he's accepting it. He's at least allowing it. If it was unacceptable to him, he wouldn't allow it. And this is where we go off the deep end. And some things have to be confronted, some things have to be challenged, but not from this place of, I emotionally cannot tolerate this. That might be telling me that I need to work through something. I might need to bring some other people in to help me do that. And it may be that you need to change the situation. God may be calling you to do that. So don't ignore that. It's just process it the right way. When you process it the right way, when you get in the present moment, there's an author, last name's Cochrane, I don't remember his first name, but he said this, and this I think gives insight to what's going on emotionally. It's easier to hand out responsibility. Only the most secure leaders can hand out authority. See, responsibility is, well, I'll let you try this, but you better do it up to my standards or I'm going to beat you down. God actually hands out authority, and there's accountability with that, but he hands out authority and then people misuse it, and it's a mess. But he's bigger than that. He actually is trying to train people to wield authority well. How do you train people to wield authority if you never actually give them authority? The angels are called authorities, and some of them are bad ones. And he's processing through all that. Only a really secure leader can hand out authority. 1 hour left. As you learn to do that, you gain humility. Because you're not pushing yourself into it. As Peter goes through this, he says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so at the proper time he may exalt you. And that leads right into casting all your anxiety on him. Why is anxiety not humility? Why is gaining humility allow you to release anxiety? What do you think? Andy? Anxiety is self-focused. And that's what happens when it takes over our imagination. We start getting so caught up in how we feel inside, what's going to happen to us, what's going on with me, and it drives us, and we just are putting ourselves too much into the center of everything. And when you learn to actually release people, give them not just responsibility, but authority, empower them, then you're letting go of that control, that anxiety is actually driving you to have. And you're focusing more on the bad that will happen, the loss that you will endure, or whatever, rather than just focusing on what God is asking you to do. Once you get to that humble place, and remember who's telling us this. This is Peter. We know his stories. We know more about his stories than most characters in the Bible. So he's not speaking from some ivory tower theory. He's lived it. He's failed. He's learned. And now he's coaching. And you learn to face fear and anxiety. And this will be our launching point for next week. But fear, right? A couple different things for fear. One is false evidence appearing real. I like false expectations appearing real. If I do everything well, these people will change. Yeah, how did that go for Jesus? Some people changed. When you read the apostles in the Gospels, it's easy for us to sit on the sidelines and be like, man, they were kind of slow to pick things up, weren't they? A lot of people do that. Like we would do better if we were in their situation. It's that sideline critic. No, we need to be more like the New Testament church. Oh, the one that was getting drunk at the Lord's Supper. That one? The one that was worshiping angels? The one that didn't even really understand the gospel of grace and was kind of buying into a works-oriented salvation? That apostolic church? Yeah, and also the one where people were real with Jesus and went out and influenced other people and changed their world and had that going on. We need to be a New Testament church. Well, we do. And that includes processing people's mess as well and not bailing on them. So you have a lot of false expectations, but they appear real to us. Or false evidence appearing real, or here's another one for fear. I expect failure, therefore we must act. The church isn't going to fail. And so there's kind of this, sky is falling, what are you going to do about it? It's like, hey, I'm going to make sure that my own heart is at rest in God's presence before I try to fix anybody else. That's what I'm going to do. See, fear in its primal form is focus. But this F-E-A-R, false expectations appearing real, that's the devil's work. And that gets us to where you look for people who are doing the two great commandments and they face fear. We'll pick up here next week. They acknowledge the truth. Wow, I'm actually feeling very threatened by this. Versus some false belief. Therefore, you're horrible, or God must hate me, or whatever. No, just don't try to put a value judgment on it. Just say, I'm feeling really threatened. I wonder why. What's really going on inside me? Because I shouldn't feel this way if I really believe that God is for me and there's no condemnation. So what's really going on here? Once you do that, you can confront that. And once you confront that and process this well, you can experience fear's power to empower you to do good. And we end today where I began. So look at people who are able to do that and keep loving God, and they show it because they're for people. They're loving people right now. Fear is focus. False evidence appearing real. False expectations appearing real. The sky is falling. I expect failure. I must act now. Usually not real. Are there those moments? Yes. If you try to live your life that way, it's not going to be good. Just face what's going on inside you and practice the two commandments. Remember what I said at the beginning. They're not about results in others. It's about what's going on in you in the present moment. Can you figure out what you're feeling so insecure about? If the gospel's true. And address it. What would we do if we didn't fear, but just faced it? What would we do? How would that change our thinking? That's step 2. So face your false expectations appearing so real to you. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this time. Help us to be people who face our own fears and experience your presence and your healing in them so that we are processing things in a way that truly loves you and right here in this present moment loves other people and carry less of our mess. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.